A fascination with the unknown. The origins of human beings' quest for knowledge about the universe. Human beings have always been fascinated with what we now call outer space. Sometime around 350 BCE, the Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that there must be something that held the sun, moon, and stars in their orbits. He also argued that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around it. There is evidence that as early as the 2nd century, the 100 CE, the Chinese had some knowledge of the boundlessness of space. In the 1540s, Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus made an argument for the heliocentric or sun-centered view of the universe, saying that everything revolved around the sun. Italian scientist Galileo made improvements to the telescope that allowed him to see moons around Jupiter and sunspots. However, it wasn't until the 1950s that human beings were able to view space from anywhere other than the ground. Tests to see whether or not machines could break the grip of gravity on Earth have been happening from the 1930s. But it wasn't until the Soviet Union launched Sputnik into space on October 4, 1957, that all of the theories were proven. The Soviets beat the United States again by putting the first human being, Yuri Gagarin, in space on April 12, 1961. 3 weeks later, the first U.S. astronaut, Alan Shepard, was launched into space, and in February 1962, John Glenn became the first U.S. astronaut to orbit the Earth. The United States was still behind the Soviet Union in space technology, but the country was about to make a major investment in changing that. In September 1962, President John Kennedy made a pledge to the American people that the United States would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The Apollo project was established by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, to figure out how to make a moon landing possible. There were a number of fits and starts along the way, including the deaths of 3 American astronauts on the launch pad, but by July 1969, the United States was ready for their trip to the moon. Commander Neil Armstrong, pilot Michael Collins, and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin left the launch pad from the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida on July 16, 1969. After 3 days of traveling to the moon, Collins put the command module in lunar orbit. The next day, July 20, 1969, Aldrin landed the lunar module on the surface of the moon, and at 10:56 p.m., Armstrong emerged from the lunar module and stepped down the ladder of the lunar module toward the surface of the moon. As he took his last step onto the moon's surface, he announced to close to 500 million people watching on Earth that the step he was about to take was one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The next day, Armstrong and Aldrin blasted off from the surface of the moon and rejoined the command module, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The United States would send astronauts to the surface of the moon 5 more times before budget cuts postponed other missions. Only Apollo 13 did not fulfill their mission, having an accident in space that prevented it from happening. The United States is still the only nation to land astronauts on the moon, and there are calls for the country to rededicate itself to the same purpose, or perhaps go even further.